say, hey, how come you did that? Or hey, you didn't listen to us on that. I would like that better, just to have the open town hall meetings, at least once a month, nothing else, have a district out for each counselor so that they keep up on their people that they represent. Then they bring it to the table to the mayor, which would be me, and then I discuss, and really it's my job to tell the council what they say or what they think? No. My job is to try to be a referee to make sure we come to a legitimate, reasonable decision, and one that's for the people first. So everything I want to do is taxpayer-based. I am not the city, you are. I serve the city, so that way, any way that you want to bring your words, your voice to me, great.
What I have learned in being on previous city councils, I served 15 years in Brandon, South Dakota back in the 1980s, 1990s. I served 4 years in the city council, was elected 8 years ago here, and I served 1 term on this council. And what I've learned in my business is about developing relationships, right? I do not have all the answers, and what's really cool about attending sessions like this is that I'm learning also. And I think the suggestion about
in making suggestions to improve the core areas. And then as far as having access to the mayors, I would propose to continue something that this mayor has done with his listening sessions. But I would listen. And, the mayor may not like that comment, but you know, a lot of times what I see is him telling you what is happening in the city and the winds and things like that. But the one thing I did as a councilman, I answered my phone. I listened to people, whether it was just a single housing issue or a neighborhood issue. I listened, and then we used common sense to come up with a resolution. So that's how I would move forward. Thank you.
Well, I think the question comes from probably the genesis of the fact that you don't feel listened to right now. And probably, well, one thing that's surprising when you even ask the question is like, we're not already doing this. That's probably in and of itself indicative of, yes, I would be absolutely supportive of that. A mantra that I often talk about and I would bring to the mayor's office is that seek first to understand, then to be understood. So there's no way that the mayor's office can dictate what he or she or their administration feels is best for a neighborhood or an association or an organization until you feel that that person can seek to understand your, in this case, your neighborhood. I know there are great resources available, federally and otherwise, that we're not tapping into, and things that we would look to as a city to say, okay, citizens, how can we better do this? What are we doing wrong? And being open and being willing to take that feedback. I think that's also a sign of an effective leader, is saying, we're willing to hear things that aren't really great to hear. And we want you to tell us the truth, not just what we want to hear. And I think in some ways you've maybe been frustrated with that, and I know that. And so, long story short, would love to have these. I would love to listen. I would love to learn, because in listening is the only way we're going to solve some of these issues. So I hope to also bring a style that also empowers you as neighborhoods to feel like you're being listened to.
Question 2. Core neighborhoods hold dear the concept of live, work, and play. With that in mind, design standards, permits, density, preservation, and other important factors are all involved in urban planning. How will you address the current lack of urban designers and planners staffed by the City of Sioux Falls? How will your administration address design coordination challenges across departments? What is your vision and roadmap going forward so that, for instance,
our neighborhoods are protected and that we all want to stay there? If the zoning and other regulations are driving people out, well, then they're moving out to the edge of towns, and then we've created a problem with infill and redevelopment. So we need to at least try to make it convenient and or available, and I guess I would only say that we would have to address that.
I'm with Greg on this one. It's a good question. How about if I just ask you guys a question? How many people in here are pretty good at designing things in their home, you know, decorating, you know. Here we go again, open town halls. How can we address this sort of situation? With your input. It's pretty obvious that you live in the area, who's gonna know what you want and what best way to do it? We're gonna have to check ordinances, we're gonna have to check regulations and everything, but with your help, we can either change, modify, reform, or completely eliminate certain things that are holding neighborhoods back. But there again, we need to hear from you. Because if one person is left up to it, or the code enforcement, or the planning and zoning, we're only relying on what they're saying. And that we can only rely on the fact that they're out there talking to you. But with the open town halls, we hear you. That's what I want to do.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
You know, it's a really good idea when you've got multi-questions built into one. It's great.
So how will you address the current lack of urban designers and planners staffed by the city of Sioux Falls? How will your administration address design coordination challenges across departments? And what's your vision or roadmap going forward so that development or redevelopment isn't feeling like a free-for-all?
Well, first of all, I really do believe that City Hall needs to adapt a customer service-centric philosophy when dealing with our citizens. The city should be advocates for its citizens. There should not be adversarial positioning in there. We should be able to talk and understand where we're all coming from. And quite honestly, each of our neighborhoods, especially our older neighborhoods, you know, they're all really different. They truly are. And one design standard for everything across the city just is not going to work. We do need to have a little bit of flexibility in our planning, and we do need to be address the people's concerns. And quite honestly, we talked about organizations, you know, about community organizations, and we should be able to take input from the people that live in those communities. You know, the lot sizes in those well-established neighborhoods that are older are significantly smaller than they are in other parts of the city that are being developed. And when you have that require the setbacks and stuff that we have in most areas, there becomes some real challenges with those. So each neighborhood actually does have its identity, and there is no simple answer. I'm going to keep coming back to this because there is no one answer. And I don't think any of us sitting up at this table are going to have those answers. But we're going to have to work together to understand what those needs are and address them as a team. Working together, we're going to be able to accomplish a lot. And I think that's what we need to do.
I look at it as vision. When you talk about the core neighborhoods, all of you here are living in different core neighborhoods. The core neighborhoods that we listed here, what's in the middle of those core neighborhoods? Our downtown. What have we done with our downtown? We've used a vision to recreate that downtown so that it is something that's encouraging, welcoming, and bringing people back downtown. We can use those same lessons in our neighborhoods. As was said earlier, each neighborhood has its own style, and we need to listen to the citizens on what they would like to have in their core neighborhoods. And then, as I was talking about the downtown, our downtown Sioux Falls director is an urban planner. He has great experience in that before he returned back to his home city of Sioux Falls. So utilizing some of those ideals and then utilizing maybe some of our private planning companies that we have here that are already working with the city, coming up with ideals that will be incorporated with the ideals that you've given us to recreate your neighborhoods, to make them more welcoming, make them more safe. And then, you know, the last thing is, you know, time. Oh, I didn't hear a bell.
Well, I think one thing that the city can do to address this specific question is looking at a department-wide, citywide, department-by-department strategic planning process. I'm going to put my business hat on for a little bit since we couldn't introduce ourselves. I owned a business the last 10 years, grew from nothing to 36 employees, $5.5 million in revenue. And the only way we got there was by creating strategic plans that were coordinated amongst the different departments. And believe it or not, we do not have a universal, coordinated strategic planning process amongst our city departments. So at times, the left does not know what the right is doing in terms of planning and economic development and building services and parks and rec. So that's a big problem and that's a big challenge. I also feel that there needs to be some flexibility with code enforcement, zoning, planning, with core neighborhoods. To expect core neighborhoods to abide by some of the same planning ordinances and zoning ordinances that we will give to someone at 95th and Western is unrealistic. And that will incentivize people like my friend John Cook and others who have a heart for revitalizing these neighborhoods, but we're making it really hard on them to do so. So I want to provide more flexibility to those entrepreneurs, those developers who say, we want to be down here, city, we want to help, but we need you to play ball with us as well.
I actually, Katrina, had this question posed to me in part of a conversation yesterday about urban planners and what role does that fill in the city and our need. And I think one of the key parts of that is just simply urban planning. We have, we are growing. We are at a point where the next mayor, after the first 4 years, will see the city at 200,000. So we have to be bringing in that skill set into our city staff of urban planners that are trained in this and understand what growth looks like as we are growing so fast and understanding the different dynamics and how we balance all of those needs. But what's also key to that is to continue to listen to our residents, regardless of which neighborhood they're in. But we have so many in the core that, and I'm looking at Mr. DeBoer here, that are almost, am I fair to say you're kind of a hobbyist urban planner a little bit? Yeah, okay. But there are so many great ideas out here within this group and within these residents to tap into. And I think that is why it's so key to have those opportunities to access City Hall, so that you can access that talent pool as we do bring in urban planners, but that you can also access City Hall, access the mayor's office. And that's why we have put those opportunities out there in the campaign, and that's why we'll continue to put those out there in the administration as well. So as you have those ideas, you can come in and tell us as well, so that we can plan for the city through your eyes and couple that with the talent of folks that have studied this as well.
Question 3. There are many historic properties outside of historic districts within the core neighborhoods that are being torn down regularly. There are also many historic properties within those historic districts that are threatened to be demolished. How do you plan as mayor to protect historic structures, whether they are within a historic district or not? And how will you ensure that construction projects conform to historic guidelines and existing building codes? And also, if you want to address the infill development that happens when things are torn down, that would be great.
Wow. Well, number one, I believe that our historic places should be preserved, so that would be probably a priority that the city takes and allocates money to make sure that our historical places are preserved, number one. Number two, as far as, making sure that they follow the new codes versus the old design, that's not too tough. I mean, all we gotta do is make sure that the people that are doing it are enough so that they can do it. I mean, land changes every year. You got property that the soil was packed and 20 years later it's so soft that it moves. So I mean, that's nature and its own generation there, but we need to make sure that, history is something we all have. I come from Germany, so my history is, I'm an immigrant, So history means a lot to me. And we need to preserve these places so that people that remember them now can tell their children about it. And also, we don't want to change it so that it doesn't look like it did to begin with. We want to make sure they've seen it how it really was. Now, when we tear something down, which in my administration we wouldn't be doing, we tore it down, we rebuilt it. But if we're going to backfill or infill or anything like that, don't we want to bring something close to that historic culture, or do we want to put a brand new design house in there? I believe we'd want to stay within that historical design. Thank you.
I do know in a few areas, where we have historic preservation sites and they're designed to be, they're already designated historic areas. And downtown, for example, with the facade easement programs the city has to rebuild the facades to look like they have looked historically. I believe those laws already exist, and we need to make sure that they're enforced and they follow the code. If it is a historic preservation district and houses have to be a certain way, that's the way they need to be built. So that if it's that way and people are aware of it, it needs to be done. However, people do own their own properties. And sometimes, in some areas, it's cheaper to tear down. It's a case of economics, right? It's cheaper to tear something down and build it with new than it is to restore something that's old. I lived in a real old house growing up. It dated to the early 1900s. And we were always maintaining the thing, and it was a challenge for us economically to be able to continue to do that. And the house continues. It's still alive today under different ownership, but it's a challenged location, and it gets very expensive to do that. So we do need to look at what kind of funding is available, and there is limited funding on the city side, I understand that. But it does come down to the property owners, and if they're going to take pride in what they have, recommendations that our districts have to the city, what we can do, it's going to be a tough one to decide, and there is no city fix on it because the city just does not have enough money to be able to preserve these areas and continue to rebuild some of these areas. We just don't have the money.
Our core areas are being redeveloped. Every one of you that are living in the core area have seen this. As the city and our hospitals grow, they need more property. They're buying that property up and they're redeveloping it. On my time on the city council, I worked with a group called SECOG, Southeastern Council of Governments, and that was the Governor's House program. We've made some wins on that, and we've made some losses, or at least one that I can think of over on Waltz, where the neighborhood wasn't real happy with the house in there. But our city does have a housing replacement program. We're replacing homes on properties in the core neighborhoods at a loss. I think that as mayor, I would want to change this. One of the things that we're looking at is, as these hospitals and the city develops the core, taking a look at homes that are structurally sound, that normally would get destroyed and put in our landfill. A good example right now is 28th and Coble. The city bought virtually the entire block of homes. Speaking to some of the city officials, they told me that it was disappointing to watch some of those homes get destroyed. There's an old ideal. It's talking about picking those homes up, putting them on new foundations, and giving them a second life. They match with the neighborhoods they're going to go into.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Sure.
There are many historic properties outside of historic districts within the core neighborhoods that are being torn down regularly. There are also many historic properties within historic districts that are being threatened to be demolished. How do you plan to protect historic structures, whether they are within a historic district or not? How will you ensure that construction projects conform to historic guidelines and existing building codes? And if you want to address infill development, that would be great too.
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, historic preservation and neighborhood character is obviously very important. It's why you're living where you're living, because you don't want to be in the burbs, and you like being in the core of the city. My first home that my wife and I bought 15 years ago was at 28th and 5th, and we chose that location for a reason, right by St. Mary's. We wanted the character of where we were living. That being said, I think the McKinnon Park House example, and everybody knows what I'm talking about, is a great example of a lack of communication and collaboration, even with amongst our city departments, because something fell down through that process. And there's a lot of finger pointing, but it shows that we can do a lot better in this area. And that's one example we can point to. Jim mentioned the Facade Easement program, which exists for downtown business owners to revitalize their facade to keep with historic characteristics. It would make a lot of sense to also have a similar program to retain and keep the historic characteristics of historic homes in our core. So if they are expensive to maintain and build, let's not just say, well, this is too expensive, let's demo this 100-year-old home. Is there a program, grant that we can apply for that the city will cooperate with that will help us save this structure and then hire the guys, like I mentioned, or like a John Cook who has experience doing that and can do it efficiently and cost effective to get the most dollars for that grant money that the city may have?
I think a lot of times when we look at the homes that are in our core and those historic ones, those ones we want to preserve, I'm going to speak from first person experience / second person. I'm going to throw my husband into this mix too here. A lot of times folks have this opportunity to purchase a home in the core that they want to turn into a rental home. And it may be their first rental property. And they don't necessarily know how to fix it up, how to make it cash flow, how to make that work. And one of the conversations that I've been excited to have had throughout this campaign process is with the folks at the South Dakota Multi-Housing Association, and how when first-time buyers that want to turn a property into a rental property can be taught how to be good landlords. And I think a part of that can be educating as well as how do you preserve the historic nature of a home? And how do you make sure that it remains the integrity of the neighborhood as well? And then, as far as design standards and codes, normally we would say the elephant in the room, but the yellow house in the room is a breakdown in communication. And that we as City Hall and as city departments and as neighbors and neighborhoods have to be talking more and ensuring that there's more efficiency in that. And so I think that is key as well to ensuring that, we as a city don't want to have any more lawsuits, right? We don't have the money to keep doing that, but we can have communication to help make that stop. And then I think also on our rental properties, working to encourage education programs for new landlords as well.
I think I got it.
You do get it?
Yeah. So the process of registering a home or building to be in a historic preservation program is very complicated. It's very drawn out. One of the ways perhaps that the city could help is to walk homeowners and business owners through that process. Look at Nyberg's Ace downtown here, and I'm personally aware of the challenges that it took for them in order to redevelop that building and maintain historical preservation or historical register. That process is difficult, it's expensive. I think that's the way that the city could help individuals do it. Certainly the property is the individuals. If it's in a historical district already, then they've got challenges if they want to make changes to that historical building. Allowing more of those districts to be created is an option as well. But I wanted to get to the infill part about it, if I could. Redeveloping and infilling the neighborhood is vital. And one of the challenges, and I don't want to increase code enforcement, but they are the ones who can make sure, along with planning, that infill is done properly and that the characters of the neighborhood are kept. And we've talked a little bit about governor's homes. That's a great resource for us to do that. But those designs are pretty limited. And when they get moved into an existing neighborhood, they oftentimes don't match.
How'd you go to mom yell?
I'll mom yell all day and want to. Okay, I decided to skip to one of the last questions because it kind of goes right into what we've been talking about. Most neighborhoods have, in the core, have a mix of owner-occupied and rental properties. For instance, in All Saints, where I'm from, it's like 80-20% rentals to homeowner-occupied facilities or residences. Recently, and this came more from the McKinnon Park area, a number of single-family homes that had been previously used as owner-occupied homes have been purchased and converted to rental units. How will you work with the neighborhoods and the city council to ensure that an appropriate mix of housing is maintained in the core neighborhoods? And this, again, is an issue that Cathedral and Pettigrew have dealt with as well.
Boy,
questions are really difficult, and as you know, as we've seen up here, it's awful hard to give a simple answer in a period of 90 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever the case might be. Evidently, we had in those neighborhoods, we've had a property owner that has decided to sell his property, and a purchaser who bought that property that turned it in, evidently following city regulations and guidelines, and wanted to turn it into rental property, and doing so, he's got to meet certain codes and he's got to meet certain inspections. The trouble is that, you know, if we turn around and create more laws, the question is that what we truly need to do? We need to protect our historic districts. If we need to apply for it, I believe that city assistance we have can be there. But again, I think part of what we need to do is look to the neighborhood associations, and the suggestion of doing that, and maybe having an association council where we can address those things, would help to give the city council and the mayor's office some guidelines as to what the people want to see that's happening out there. Ordinances already exist, and things are being handled according to current city ordinances. So we will need some input if we're going to change that. That input has got to come from you folks. It's as simple as that.
A few months ago, I attended a neighborhood meeting. It was the All Saints neighborhood meeting. And the city had come to the All Saints and wanted to inform them about a block that was going to be redeveloped in their neighborhood. It was right on the edge of their neighborhood, between 18th and 19th in Minnesota and Dakota there. And I thought it was a great meeting that they had that night, because it was an amazing interaction between the administration and a neighborhood. And I found out one thing from that meeting too, with that neighborhood association. You folks got it. You understood what was going to happen, what needed to happen, and then you also contributed your ideals and your thoughts on this. And you moved that ahead, and you moved it forward. And those are the things that we need to do with each neighborhood. Once again, we need to listen to the neighborhoods and make sure that we interact with them in a positive manner. Is that buzzing there?
No, you're still good.
That's okay.
Can you repeat the question real quick, please?
Most neighborhoods have a mix of owner-occupied and rental properties. Recently, a number of single-family homes in McKinnon have been used as owner-occupied homes, but now purchased and converted to rental units. How will you work with the neighborhood and the city council to ensure that an appropriate mix of housing is maintained in our core neighborhoods?
So one thing when we talk about rental units, and I want to be sure that I'm not painted as this anti-rental unit person, because there are good renters, all right, and there are good people who want to rent, and they want to rent in our core. I think that the challenge that we're talking about here is specifically when that density gets out of whack between rentals and owner-occupied. And it's funny you ask that, because this is actually an issue I've been digging into. This is a Pettigrew Heights map. You don't have to look at it. But the rental density there is an issue I was looking at, to say where are there pockets of consistent rentals, 4, 5, 6 in a row, that are either ripe for redevelopment or ripe for stronger code enforcement. And I think that's one thing that we can do, is make sure that the communities know that the city is having strong, proper, efficient code enforcement, so that the word rental, and it's like, oh, that's turning into a rental next door, doesn't instantly mean, oh crap, now I have a rental next door. We want to know that the city is going to hold those renters accountable for the same standards that you would have for your own owner-occupied property. I want to respect the rights of the landlords, of the developers, but I also know there's some shady characters that are landlords. I get it, and I think we as a city have to make sure they know that if you are a shady landlord, we're going to enforce that, and we're going to make sure that you abide by the ordinances and the laws that we have to make you an effective landlord.
Here's the thing, I don't think anyone necessarily goes in and says, hey, I'm going to be a landlord who's a scumbag. But a lot of times folks don't know how to be a good landlord. It might be their first property, or it might be their second or third, but they haven't been shown where there are those opportunities to connect with the community more, where there are those opportunities to improve that structure that they bought. And that's why I think it's crucial that as a city we encourage our nonprofit organizations, and I will go back to the South Dakota Multi-Housing Association where I've had the conversation about how do we do more training with new landlords starting out, and of course continuing training as well, so that they know when they buy a property and they're getting into that business, what they need to do, how they can connect with their neighborhood, because they may own the property and they may not live there, but we still want them to be connected to that neighborhood. That is still really important as well. So getting them that education, having that training for them, and as a city, connecting into that training as well so that they know what those resources are that the city can help with too. I think that is crucial, because at the end of the day, if you are the owner or the renter or the landlord, I think we just genuinely want to be good neighbors, just sometimes you need some help doing that.
Well, let's see, so, a lot of stuff gets talked about, and I'm the cleanup guy, and I'm the last guy to kind of fill it in, so let me just fill in where I can. You answer, so you're extra cleanup. So think of this, there are very few rules or pressures that get put on people to determine who gets to own it and what they get to do with their property. And that's a private property privilege that we all have. You could do. But owner-occupied homes have tax incentives that they get to appreciate. If you're renting out the property, then you've got other tax burdens that you'll have to pay and be a part of. The ways that the mayor can work with the city council along with the neighborhoods is to ensure that perhaps maybe there's a change in zoning and code enforcement, so that if it's a neighborhood, a certain neighborhood, you couldn't have 6 cars parked out front. So that might prevent others from, say, renting out their homes and improve and encourage home ownership to stay within the area. The rental registration that the city keeps, that database, encouraging that to be kept up to speed and up to date, so that if the code enforcement needs to reach somebody because they've got too many cars parked out there, or look like a bunch of people are living in one single family home, that they have a way to communicate with the owner. Just a couple of ideas.
Okay, well, let's see here. So let's get to the bottom line here, honest to God. Now, everybody bought their home. Why? Because they wanted to be a homeowner. They wanted a single dwelling home. You bought your home in a neighborhood that was just basically a family home. There wasn't any rentals there. So let's get down to the situation and put this into perspective. We have homes, we have trailer courts, which have mobile homes. Mobile homes were segregated and put in certain areas to keep them out of the homeowners' areas. Now, having a rental here and there in the homeowners' area, 1 or 2 isn't too bad, but I think what you're really talking about here is you're afraid that the next thing you know, you're going to have the only family dwelling home, and you're going to have 300 multiple rentals around you, because it looks like that's kind of the thing that's happening today, is that we're getting multi-units all over the city. And they're interjecting them into neighborhoods because they don't want to have them in one compiled place downtown or over in this neighborhood over here. So basically, when people buy a home in a neighborhood, maybe they should already know what the codes are. We don't need any more codes. We don't need any more restrictions, because if we're not going to enforce what we have, how many more is it going to take before they're enforced? So the thing is if you already live in a place and you say, yeah, I want to get along with my neighbors. That's the idea, getting along with your neighbors. And if somebody else comes in and buys a home and says, well, I'm going to go down there and try to get rezoning to make this a multiple, rental unit, and you say, well, we don't like that, and you go down to the city and, well, they just happen to know somebody on the city council, well, they pass it even though you're against it. That shouldn't happen. It should be up to you. This is where the town halls come in again. You speak your piece, we listen.
Oh, Mommy, I'll let you guys. All right. Looking forward to future redevelopment of the Sioux Steel and Rail Yard properties that abut the Whittier neighborhood. When development projects occur within our core neighborhoods, pedestrians and bicyclists are inadvertently put into harm's way. For example, we've watched people with strollers have to take busy streets instead of the sidewalk due to construction projects. How do you plan on holding developers accountable for pedestrian and cyclist safety during projects that are downtown where our people come in, usually on bike or foot?
Are you talking motorcycles or bicycles?
The kind without motors.
Well, that has been one of the very interesting changes in our city recently. We are working very hard to incorporate our roadways to accommodate both motorized vehicles, motorcycles, and bicycles. And it's been a challenge because a lot of our roadways just are not wide enough to do that. But in this case, utilizing our code enforcement, our building services, and working with the developer to ensure that they do make adequate access, for those vehicles to be able to continue to get through where they need to do something that we do need to do. As far as a mayor, I would be very strong voice to our code enforcement, to our building services, to make sure that is happening. If it isn't happening, those individuals need to report that. They need to let us know. We don't know everything. We're not everywhere, even though sometimes you think government is. But let us know, and we'll get it resolved.
This one hits home for me because I am a runner and a cyclist. I love to bicycle. And actually, I lost a friend last year to a cycling accident who got hit by a car. And it was a tragic event, and we have done a very poor job in this city at allowing cyclists specifically, but walkers as well, to feel safe walking on some roads. So for instance, when I drive down Minnesota Avenue, and I know I'm getting on the core a little bit, I saw a sign that just got put up that said, bikes can use full lane. Mm-hmm. And that's like a 45-mile-an-hour speed zone. And if I would bike down there, I would fear for my life. The corner of, by the Argus Leader, where an employee was actually, multiple employees have been struck. Current mayor put up a sign, changed that to say no turn on red when pedestrians present, because it would increase traffic flow. I think that was very symbolic of our current administration's view on pedestrian rights and cyclist rights and so forth. So hold me to this. If I become the mayor, it's coming down. We're going back to how it was before. No turn on red ever. But the other thing is, when Copper Lounge collapsed, and we had to reroute those pedestrians. For the first time ever, I saw red or orange and white pylons. I'm like, wow, this is like what a big city does. They actually rerouted us appropriately here, and there's a buffer between traffic. We need to do more of that so people feel more safe in these development zones.
When it comes to getting around, one of the things I think about downtown with all the construction we've got going on is I've been downtown with my little girl who is almost 1 year old in a stroller. And you come through those areas where we're doing construction and work and try wrangling almost 1 year old in a extra wide stroller through that. It is a challenge. It's a challenge a lot of our moms and dads and families and grandparents have. And so as a city and as a mayor, I think what is really important as that construction goes, and we want to see that construction, right? It is making the city stronger, but we've got to be sure that from the mayor's office that we are having a loud voice that safety comes first, and that to also reinforce that voice is giving the citizens' voice an easy way to access us and remind us when there are issues as well. And that's why we've set up a text line that will continue. So if you are out and you see a problem area, you text in and we'll be sure someone can get to that. Having access to that communication is important. And I think it's also something that we need to be aware of for those in our community that may have accessibility challenges. And if they are in a wheelchair or another, trying to get through some of those areas, we've got to be able to be sure that we are communicating with our developers strongly, reinforcing the importance of our pedestrian safety, and then also being sure that for those that see challenges, we make it easy to report to. That you don't have to go scrolling through a bunch of pages on a website when you get home to try and find a phone number. We make it very easy, one number, a way to access those questions.
The redevelopment of Sioux Steel and the rail yard redevelopment area is going to cause a challenge for the adjoining neighbors. Like I mentioned before, while I was on the city council, we passed the Complete Streets Ordinance, which means that every time a new road is built, that all forms of transportation are considered. Pedestrian, bicyclists, motorcyclists, motorists, buses, all those forms are reviewed. So it's the city council's job to hear those come from planning when that new road is designed and when funding is approved for those roads. So the council has a role in all this. Enforcing, and I think the follow-up question was really how would the city make sure that the developers don't get away with it? The mechanisms are already in place. The interesting piece about this, though, is that the city owns the land at the rail yard redevelopment area. Sioux Steel is owned by a private developer. So I guess what you'll have is the city making some of our own decisions, moving the rail yard closer to its completion. So we'll be kind of holding ourselves accountable. And I guess the council's role in some of this is to ensure that that happens. The Sioux Steel development is a private development, and I think through the planning division, through the complete street process, all those provisions will be taken care of.
Well, I might be telling you something you don't want to hear, but Sioux Falls actually created this problem probably 50 years ago. Every city's unique. I grew up here too. And we've got everybody working on the west side. Everybody lives on the east side. We've got everybody on the north side, and they go shopping on the south side. So what happens during our most treacherous times of the day? Everybody's in a hurry. They want to beat the traffic. They don't want to be like Chicago and have bumper to bumper for 25 miles, which we're not 25 miles probably maximum across the city. But everybody goes through the harbor, and then it congests. So, if nothing else, maybe we should kind of look at the structure of how we're doing our economic side and our living side. But at the same time, maybe we should have times during the drastic times where we have a speed limit reduction so that people have to slow down. Because right now, 30, 35 mile an hour on some of the streets that are going around the downtown area, a lot of accidents are happening there too. So downtown could even be brought down to 10 mile an hour just to get through the downtown area is where the most drastic is. So it wouldn't take much to change that just at a certain period during, like 3:30 to 5 or 6 or whatever, so that they slow down so they know they have to. And we have 229 and 90 and 29. People can go out and about if they want that going that fast, so we don't need the downtown areas and interstate.
I have had the opportunity to attend a couple of public meetings dealing with the bicyclists, and they did bring out a lot of information about safety during those input sessions, and I think that's key. They were input sessions. They were asked for public information, public input, and we received that public input. So as we begin our development downtown, we need to keep the people involved in the process by informing them about where we are in the construction process. And we need to be very, very determined to make those people involved with that. As I said earlier, public safety is top of mind for all of our citizens in one form or the other. It's about public safety. It's about keeping the streets safe and keeping our citizens safe. So, and the police do a very good job, and they do work hard at it. We need to make sure the city gives them the direction. We need to keep the people informed about the development. It's very easy on private property, Sioux Steel, for example. It's really kind of isolated. It should be relatively easy there. The railroad redevelopment, as we go forward, it's going to be a time-based thing. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take place over a number of different years. So we just need to make sure that we communicate to everybody. And I also agree that the right turn on red, it was confusing when they stopped allowing us to turn right on red. And then when he took that away, that was a bad decision on my part. It was very confusing for people, and in itself probably created a few accidents or near misses. I believe in city streets like that, turning onto a major road, we should not permit those kinds of right turn on red.
development, how do you plan to hold developers and property owners accountable for property maintenance, particularly vacant lots and vacant properties? Streetscaping, design standards, trees, things like that. These are extremely important to our neighborhood group, and it's very integral to the concept of work, play, and live. Again, another accountability question.
Starts with me, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's a great question, and the answer is there are codes and enforcements that already exist. So if we're doing our job as a city, we will hopefully be enforcing some of these things that already exist. It's probably a question because it's not happening, is what I'm probably picking up. So how do we, one, do a better job of enforcement, but two, I'd also like to see some sort of, I opened with talking about a strategic plan for our departments. Also a plan for some of these specific core neighborhoods, and what is the plan for the development and redevelopment of things in these neighborhoods. So when you're executing to a plan, then you ensure that some of these things don't happen and just slip by the wayside. So it goes back to something we've already talked about. We've talked about code enforcement, doing a better job with code enforcement. Codes already exist to address these things. They just need to be enforced more aggressively.
Do I have any Parks and Recs fans in the room? Yeah, okay, a few, all right. None of us want to see the big old hole from Parks and Recs. If you've seen it, it's a big hole and it starts the whole series off. If you haven't, it's worth seeing. And so no one up here is going to tell you that we think accountability is a bad thing and that we want to end up being like a sitcom plot line with vacant lots in dangerous areas. You're not going to hear that from any of us. But what I think is key here is that we need a mayor that is going to be open and accessible. And that when there are concerns and there are problems and you see things that aren't going the way they should, you can hold us accountable as well. You're the one that elects us, you put us in office. And so it's being sure that from a mayor's perspective, you have a way to tell us when you see those concerns as well. Because that's what's important. We also need an extra set of eyes and ears, and that's what you all can provide. And while we can definitely work to ensure those relationships with developers are strong and that communication is there, sometimes too, we need other folks to help us be sure that we don't turn into that episode of Parks and Rec. And I know there's going to be a bunch of you going on Netflix tonight looking that up.
I'll be asleep.
Have you seen it though?
Just about an hour, I think I'll be asleep. Very good, so I'm trying to get to the core and the heart of the matter on this issue. So currently the code enforcement process is really driven by complaints. So a neighbor complains that their neighbor isn't following the code. And all of a sudden the city comes out and writes them a ticket. The neighbor who maybe made the complaint doesn't realize that the neighbor's received a ticket. They have no way to follow the process. Or they feel left out. They haven't been informed that in fact the city has actually taken action. And so the accountability piece, I think, could be eliminated by including, that the guy who makes the complaint is kept confidential. But when that complaint is made, that individual should receive maybe an access code or some kind of name or number so he can go on the city's website to track it. Because as you might, most of you probably all know, the first starts with a ticket, notice, a warning, and then a ticket, and then it goes to court, and process of appeal, and all that seems to be drawn out way too long for most anybody. I think the frustration comes in the accountability piece is that the individuals who are concerned about the property don't know where it is in that whole cycle. Lo and behold, to them, the owner of the property is absent. They can't communicate with the owner. And this time is ticking away, and the neighbors are getting angrier and angrier. So I just think that there's probably a better process for the person who makes the complaint to be kept in the loop better. I think that's where the enforcement piece is all part of it, but I think educating the complaint person is part of it.
How many in here believe in the Constitution and that each one of you have rights? Anybody? I mean, the thing is you should learn, it comes down to learning how to get along with your neighbor. I understand if we have a vacant lot or something that you can file a complaint and everything, but the situation is the city drops the ball many times on this because Number one, they don't want to tell you who's complaining, but realistically, due process says you have a right to face your accusers. But see, I don't know why the city has to get involved. If you guys could get along like adults and sit down and talk. Now, I know there's some properties people own that live out of state. That's a little different situation. But if you have a neighbor that lives next door, go over and have a cup of coffee. When you put the city in the middle of it, I guarantee you the city's going to make it a worse deal than it began. It's going to be worse because the city's just like any other entity. It likes turmoil. It likes creating people against people because they're going to get a fine. The person that made the complaint's not going to get the fine. So you're helping the city generate funds because you won't get along. So realistically, when we have places like that are concerned, maybe the citizens could, your neighbors could get along and try to, get it worked out before you bring the city in. I don't think more ordinances are going to make things easier, but if the city can do it, they'll play you. And I don't think that should be done. I think the people should try and work it out first.
I can tell you that Building Services does an excellent job of doing building inspections. You build a new building, you submit a plan. On that plan, you have to have so many parking spots if you're a retailer. On that plan, you also have to identify how many trees you're going to have. They come out and they count those trees. And they won't let you progress, or they will not give you an occupancy permit until you hit the code. I know. It's happened, and they come out all the time. I will also tell you that as mayor, if there's a construction site that has a bunch of papers that have blown in, and if you don't like it, you call me and I will make a personal phone call to that contractor and ask them to please pick up their messes. It is their responsibility to keep places cleaned up. They have dumpsters that go in. If we got to cover the dumpsters, so be it, we'll do that. Just give me a call and I'll make the call. It's been my experience in dealing with most of our contractors in this city. They're very reputable people. They want clean sites and they want to follow the laws too, because they're in this for business and they want to continue to serve and be in the city of Sioux Falls. So if there's any complaints along that line, like I said, give me a call and I'll make a phone call to them.
On this one here, I'm going to probably move forward as Councilman Jameson has already discussed. This is all about property rights. When there's an issue with code enforcement is called, they have to deal with property rights. And then also, they have to think about your property rights also. And it's an extremely difficult job. I've worked very closely with code enforcement on several issues, and even currently on some issues that are what I would consider neighborhood nightmares, where it's a point where they're actually taking the property owner to court, where they're going to bring in tandem dump trucks and front end loaders to clean out the lot. So it's something about understanding the process and knowing how long it could take if that property owner does not want to comply with the rules and regulations that we have here in our city. I would agree with Jim, most business owners are going to be very quick to comply, but it's those personal individuals that I see where most of the problems are. And I've seen our code enforcement department and our officers go to places where they've actually had to arrest the person.
All right, our last question of the evening. You most likely understand that we have difficulty with multimodal transportation in our core neighborhoods. For instance, a lack of bus shelters, scheduling, and geographic availability, lack of bike lanes, and sidewalks that are questionable in safety, lacking curb cuts and accessibility. What is your #1 investment priority for public and multimodal transportation in our core?
You know what really makes me mad is when I hear people say that transportation should not be an issue that we should try and tackle because it's too hard. Because if it's too hard, that says that we as a city don't care about folks that need to get around in different ways. And that is why from the beginning of this campaign, we have made it a priority to be looking at transportation solutions. We as a city cannot keep running the system that we have like we have when it's 2018. It's not 1978 or 1972. So that is why we have advocated for the use of microbuses, to tier those so that they can be used, larger buses in the core as needed according to schedules, but then also help us connect to those communities and neighborhoods outside the core with microbuses, smaller buses. They're more nimble, they're more cost efficient. But then to couple that with software that will help us essentially lift up or Uberize, or whichever term you want to use there, how we schedule and we get those buses around, so that it's not a stagnant 902, 906, 910, but instead we use technology that it's out there. Other communities, similar sizes or smaller, are using it so that it can help reroute the drivers more efficiently on main roads. So if no one's there, they can go to where they need to go using cell phone signals or calls for having that bus come there. And that's why this is crucial. We need to connect our core, we need to connect our outer edges, and that's why transportation is so key to doing this, and we can't just push that question off.
It's always nice how you whittle us down to one specific item, as it is hard to do that, but I've made my entire campaign revolving around my number one top priority, and that's roads. So imagine we're rebuilding a road in a neighborhood. Well, that's our opportunity to include those bike lanes, or to improve the access points from the curb. A smoother roadway or a new roadway in an existing neighborhood has a tremendous impact on home ownership in those neighborhoods. You feel like you've just been given a brand new road. Now all of a sudden some of the neighbors start painting their homes or cleaning up around. All of a sudden it's a great place. Instead of a road that's deteriorated beyond belief, you don't want to ride on it. You can't hardly use your stroller to go across it. So down to one item, it's really roads. Jolene hit on transportation, and I wanted to talk more about that, but I'm just going to stay with roads because it's our biggest opportunity to make improvements in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, it comes down to infrastructure, it comes down to our roads, it comes down to sidewalks that haven't been put into the city of Sioux Falls for over 60 years. A lot of places in town haven't been finished, so I'm going to come back to where I started originally, to where I think taxpayers' money should be for the taxpayer, and it should be doing things that should have been done many years ago. Not another $21 million building. $21 million goes a long way when we finish our infrastructure, especially stuff that's been put on the back burner for 50, 60 years. The neighborhood I grew up in, like I said, still doesn't have storm sewer drainage, but they're paying taxes on it. Where's that money going? Why don't they have it? So we need to do what we need to do for the infrastructure, which it would have to do with the roads, would have to do with our transportation, because I believe it wouldn't take much to get us some more bus stops out further out in the expansion areas, because the only thing is we're more worried about expanding than we are getting people picked up, giving them the opportunity to get where they got to go. And my mother needs them transportation things too, so it is a close thing. But we need to finish what we started years ago.
For public transportation, we have, the city council I know has had numerous, or the city has have charged numerous focus groups and task forces to look at our public transportation system. There is not unfortunately, there is not a simple answer, because we still haven't got the solution out there after all the time that we've spent. But there are communities in this nation that are making some different, they're thinking outside the box, and they're doing some things different. One of them is Arlington, Texas. So we do need to spend some time and look at this with how they are looking at improving their public transportation, and we need to make the efforts to do it, to at least try it, maybe in a sample area at first, but then take and progress with more. As far as the city streets, there is a plan as far as city streets go to repair or replace city streets. I just don't think the city's done a very good job of communicating that to you. As an example, this year alone, I know Public Works plans on doing mill and overlay on over 400 city blocks this year. There'll be mill and overlay reconstruction of the surfaces of 400 city blocks. So expect a lot of cones this year, because we're going to see it again, because they are committed to repairing our streets. Personally, myself, for bicycles and motorcycles, this time of year, the streets are terrible. I mean, if you hit one of those ruts that we see in our roads, so you're going to go down. We need to make sure there is a hotline you can dial into to get patchwork done on a temporary basis on those things, to fill those potholes make sure you notify the city if that needs to be done. They've got 3 city crews out there ready to go on a daily basis right now, so just be informed. And we are going to have to work on this an awful lot more.
I live in one of the core neighborhoods that doesn't have wastewater, storm sewers, and things like that. But if you talk to my neighbors, you talk to the neighborhood, we don't want them. We like the low income, the low impact neighborhoods is what they're called. And that's the way we want it. Hermosa is between Cliff and North 4th Avenue. It was just milled and overlaid over last summer. We now have a nice, smooth road, and we like it. Also, this summer, there will be markings placed on that road for bicyclists, for people to walk, to hopefully protect them as they're moving along that main road of that neighborhood. Then let's talk about the core neighborhoods again. We have other programs to help extend roadways' lives, a micro-seal program, where you can go to work in the morning, they'll do your block that day, and when you come home from work, you can drive and park in your driveway. And it will extend a residential life of a roadway maybe up to 5 years. That allows us to continue moving forward with the roadway projects that we're doing. As the city grows, it becomes even more important to not only remember that we're doing new roadways, but that we have to maintain the older ones also. And then quickly speaking about transit, I guess I can.
If I can just be vulnerable for 1 minute with you, I will tell you that I do not have a good solution to our public transportation problem. I will not sit up here and say that I do, because I don't. It's probably the one, and that frustrates a guy like me, because I want to solve it. It's a hard challenge. But to address your question, public transportation, I think, is the number one need in what you mentioned there. When we lost a lot of our federal earmark money, we lost a lot of our public transportation money. And that puts a considerable strain on the operating budget for our public transportation system. Do we need it? Absolutely, we need it. And we have to look at it as it's a quality of life system for a lot of people. I don't see us ever getting to a point where it's a self-sustaining enterprise fund where it pays for itself. But like all the things we've talked about tonight, it takes dollars. It takes dollars to support that. And so I want to be realistic before I give you recommendations or what I'm going to do, because I know what our budget can and can't support. And I've met multiple times with people in the public transit office. I've met people at the public transit board, and they're no further along today than they were 6-7 years ago on what is the solution. Challenge we have in Sioux Falls, when we talk about core, we have a sprawled community. We don't have a real deep density, which is often really a success metric for public transportation. The more density you have, the better public transit system. So it's a hard one for me to answer, and it's vulnerable for me to say, I don't have a great solution, but I want to dig into that one.
Thank you. That was the last question of the evening. I do have a rapid fire round, but I think we'll skip it because it's, like 8:23 right
Actually,
now.
learned that rapid fire isn't very rapid.
On behalf of all the core neighborhood leaders, I just want to say thanks to all of you for coming out and spending time listening to our mayoral candidates. It's really important that you're here, and we hope that a lot of your issues and questions and concerns were somewhat answered tonight. I thank all of them for their time. Thank you so much, everyone. And if you are not currently hooked up with your neighborhood association and you live in the core neighborhood, in a core neighborhood, please seek them out. They are not associations that are going to tell you where to put your trash can. There are no fees involved. It's all about getting together with your neighbors, networking, and working on problems and issues together. So thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
There's a door over there if you wanted to go out.
Oh,
Yeah, that way.